Hello, I'm Austin Kelly.
And I'm John Riley.
Our presentation is on the requirements elicitation technique of introspection.
By this point, we know you may be eagerly asking, what is introspection? Well, consider this. You are a requirements engineer with a lot of experience in agriculture, grew up on a farm, and have a decent amount of business experience under your belt. Your client, a farmer who owns a large farming business, wants you to design an application of keeping track of farming equipment and maintenance. He has already expressed to you some ideas, but you've just barely started the process of requirements engineering for the application. Where are you going to start? One idea is to put yourself in the shoes of the farmer, asking yourself the question, if I were him, what would I want my application to be able to do? You then write up a long list of ideas and maybe even create a rough chart. This is introspection. In simple terms, introspection is the act of making assumptions about the stakeholders' goals and desires, and is often the base point for other requirement elicitation techniques. Within the categories of elicitation techniques, introspection has often been categorized as a traditional technique alongside interviews and surveys.
So what are some advantages of introspection? First of all, introspection is probably the cheapest technique out of all the techniques. This is largely due to the fact that introspection does not require any outside interaction with any stakeholders and only requires prior experience in thinking. Thus, there is less time and effort that is utilized into implementing this technique. Not only is it cheap, introspection makes a good starting activity for other requirement elicitation techniques. For example, once the analyst has created a list of ideas that he or she feels the stakeholders would want, the analyst can then create a survey asking for each stakeholder's opinion about the list of ideas. The question now becomes, how effective is introspection? Well, it depends on how well versed the analyst is in the domain and goals of the project. Let's go back to the example of the farmer we talked about at the beginning. Because the requirements engineer had a lot of experience with farming and farm equipment, she would not have any difficulty visualizing the domain and the goals of the stakeholder. Now, if we were to say the requirements engineer did not have any experience with farming or agriculture and was ignorant when it comes to farming equipment and maintenance, introspection would not be a good option because the engineer would have no clue as to the needs of the farmer.
So what is the downside to using introspection? Well, from the previous slide, you might be able to guess. Really, there's only one disadvantage. However, it can have a large amount of impact. Simply put, introspection requires a lot of experience. Specifically, it requires the requirements engineer to be familiar with the domain and goals of the system. This means that they need to be familiar with the context in which the system will be used, as well as what the system is going to be used for. Furthermore, the requirements engineer also needs to be an expert in the business processes of the users. This means that they need to be familiar with the way in which the system will be used and what processes it will be benefiting or replacing. Without this sort of knowledge, the requirements engineer cannot as accurately make assumptions about the system requirements.
So, when should we consider using introspection and when should we avoid it? As noted earlier, introspection should only be used if the requirements engineer is familiar with the domain and goals of the stakeholder. Using this approach without any background knowledge will yield poor results. If, however, the requirements engineer chooses to use introspection as one of her techniques, she should make sure that it is the first method to be applied. This is so that she can get a general understanding of where to start in terms of asking questions and getting information from the stakeholders. It would be unwise to use introspection midway through the elicitation process. Doing so would be counterintuitive. If an analyst already has data collected from the stakeholders, then there's no need to sit there and ponder on what he thinks the stakeholder might want because he already knows.
In order to better understand introspection, we decided to put it to the test. Applying introspection to the group cookbook app that we will design as a class turned out to be quite easy because we ourselves can be considered stakeholders in the project. Thus, being stakeholders and analysts, we were able to have a decent understanding of the domain and goals of the system. Though we would not consider ourselves experts in the business processes of cooking and creating cookbooks, we felt that our experience was enough to pass.
Here is the data that we collected through using the process of introspection regarding our class group cookbook app. Some of these ideas that we came up with are the ability to collaborate on and share cookbooks and recipes,
User account functionality,
ability to have private recipes or cookbooks,
ability to export recipes and cookbooks,
built-in shopping list, and ability to add items directly from recipes,
explore recipes and cookbooks by looking at ones people have already made publicly available,
a built-in timer,
the ability to search recipes within the app,
and the ability to adjust servings so that it adjusts ingredient measurements accordingly.
So just to recap on what we have learned about introspection, introspection is all about making assumptions about the stakeholders' goals and desires.
It is useful when the analyst is familiar with the domain and goals of the stakeholders.
And introspection is generally the starting point for the requirements elicitation process. We appreciate you for watching our presentation. We hope by watching our presentation that you gained a better understanding of introspection and how it can be used in the elicitation process.